Hey guys, I'm Urizi. This story is all about what if Naruto turns into a fox during a full moon. Pre-timescope, no Biju, Konoha is a village of ninjas who hunt demons. Naruto is a ninja with secrets. And tonight is the night of a full moon. Before we proceed with the story, please like and subscribe to this channel if you liked the video, and don't forget to check the description for the other works of the author if you liked the story. Let's start. Chapter 31, Wrath and Gloom. Kushina was absolutely on edge. She was so close to her son. But she had to wait. Naruto seemed to be busy, and the old man apparently needed to make arrangements so that she could see him. And the old man was busy with one of his chunin, so she would wait. Masking her anxiety with her usual cheerful demeanor, she turned to go wait outside the Hokage's office. "You can wait here if you promise to be quiet," the Hokage told her. "Okay," Kushina agreed with a bit of a pout and shifted direction from the office doors to prop her shoulder against the back wall. The chunin that she'd preempted looked young, not much older than 20 if he was even that old. He was dressed in the standard chunin and jonin uniform with his medium-length hair up in a high ponytail and a horizontal scar over the bridge of his nose. It didn't seem that he had much of a sense of humor as he looked at her suspiciously, probably annoyed that she'd barged in on his little meeting. "Irika, you were saying?" the Hokage prompted, catching the chunin's attention. "Ah, yes," the chunin coughed. "I was wondering if I could visit Naruto." "Why does he want to visit with Naruto?" Kushina wondered, immediately suspicious. Who is this Irika character? Or, if I could at least hear more details on his condition, Irika added. His condition? Her jaw tightened. What the hell does he mean by that? "I had a feeling that that was what you were going to ask about," the Hokage said. "At this time I can't arrange a meeting for you, but I can tell you that Naruto is doing much better. Hopefully by the time of the next full moon he should be back to normal or very close to it." "What the hell happened?" her mind screamed as she bit her tongue to keep quiet. "That's very good to hear," Irika replied. "But, I can't see him." "You promised her visitation. She is Naruto's mother, she's come from very far away to see him, and if I told her no she would tear this village apart to find him," the Hokage explained. "Would she?" was Irika's dubious response. At that moment, Kushina decided that she did not like this chunin. She did not like his attitude or appreciate his suspicion of her. Had she been standing close enough to him, she would have hit him. "I would if I had to," she snapped, unable to stay mute. "Are you done talking to him now? Because it's very clear to me that things have changed since I got on the road to come here." "I do believe we are done," the Hokage sighed, "unless you have anything else to add, Irika." "No, Hokage-sama," the chunin murmured with a bow. "Thank you for seeing me." Kushina glowered at the chunin's retreating back. When he was gone from the office, she turned to the leader of the Leaf. The grim look on the old man's face made her anxiety level shoot through the roof. "What happened?" The Hokage sighed again and removed his hat, running a hand over his receding hairline. Somehow Fugaku came to suspect Naruto of being a werewolf, and instead of openly protesting his presence, he tried to go behind my back and eliminate the boy, he told her. At first what he was saying didn't register. Fugaku was a class A jerk, but he was a complainer. He wasn't ballsy enough to touch her son. But Minato was gone. She had been in Uzu, and he had no idea that she was here now, and even if he had known, it probably wouldn't have worried him as he had never thought much of her. Perhaps he hadn't even realized that Naruto was their child. And if he thought he could take out a hated werewolf without the Hokage being able to stop him, there wasn't enough fear or caution to hold him back. He would do it. He did do it. "I'll kill him," she thought. "I'll kill him, I'll kill him, I'll kill him, I'll kill him, I'll." He failed, Kushina, the old man told her, and a corner of her mind wondered when he'd left his desk to grab her shoulders. Umbu stopped him. "Naruto is alive and on the mend. He is in a secure location under Umbu guard. You should be able to visit him tomorrow afternoon. Fugaku is in prison and I will keep him there for as long as I can. Those who helped him are either imprisoned or dead." It was like she couldn't catch her breath. The burning need to rend the bastard into a million pieces, incinerate the bits, and then spit on the ashes, pounded in her brain. Her dampening crystal hummed not a sound, but a sensation in her chakra with the strain of preventing her from spontaneously transforming. She really didn't care for the logic that the Hokage was throwing at her. If memory serves, Uchiha Mikoto is your friend, the old man said, taking a different angle. I don't believe she'd appreciate it if you murdered her husband. Kushina hissed and trembled with fury. And should you seek vengeance on Fugaku, you will be sabotaging your clan's hopes of being Konoha's allies separate from Uzushiagaku, he continued. I don't think your family would be very happy about that. She gnashed her teeth in rage. You really need to calm down, the Hokage commanded sternly. I don't have the umbu to spare to make sure that you don't do anything foolish. An ugly guttural growl slipped from her throat and she shook herself. Permission to find a training ground and blow something up, Hokage-sama. She managed to choke out. Go ahead, he nodded. I'll send someone to bring you to your living quarters later. Thank you, Kushina grunted and stalked off to vent. I should have pushed through the rain, she thought bitterly as she stormed through the tower, heedless of the administrative ninja who had to scamper out of her way. I should have sprinted here. If only I'd made it in time. Prison is too good for that asshole. Kabuto left his favorite herbal shop with a bag full of ingredients for a dozen poisons and antidotes. With current events the way that they were, he felt it necessary to stock up. Who knew when it would come in handy? The Uchiha have really overstepped themselves this time, he thought, pushing his glasses up his nose. There were always rumors that they found ways to secretly eliminate full-blown werewolves that had been captured for study over the decades, but there was never any proof. Genjutsu that excites a subject to the point that their heart gives out are impossible to detect after death. But this. And the fact that the victim was Naruto, the boy with no last name and a whole lot of holes in his background, piqued Kabuto's interest even more. He would have liked to dig harder to gather information on the boy, but he risked drawing unfortunate attention to himself. However, if things calmed down maybe he could. Excuse me, but are you Yakushi Kabuto? The genin medic paused and found a man with dark brown hair, pale blue eyes, and a foreign Hittite speaking to him. Yes, I am, Kabuto answered politely. Can I do something for you, sir? I hope so, the stranger replied. I've heard that you're the person to see about snake bite remedies. I do know a thing or two about snake bites, Kabuto admitted modestly. If you'll follow me home so that I can drop off my purchases, I'd be happy to share my knowledge. Lead the way, the stranger smiled. Kabuto returned his smile and headed back to his apartment, the stranger shadowing him. So, this is the Uzunin that Orochimaru-sama wants me to assist. Interesting. I'll have to take notes on him as well. Sasuke couldn't focus. There is only one course of action here. He tried to run through the basic agility course that Kakashi had laid out for him. We cannot afford to harbor any taint within the clan. But the weights he had to wear were heavy and he kept tripping. From this day forth, you are Uchiha no more. When he got to the targets, his kunai went wide, a few even missing the painted rings entirely and zipping off into the surrounding trees. Leave our lands and never return. It had been a very long time since he'd performed so poorly. You are dead to us. He just couldn't focus. Enough, Sasuke, Kakashi said, stopping the boy from trying the course a third time. Come sit down. Sasuke obeyed and trudged over to where the Jonin was standing. The weights strapped to his wrists and ankles slowed him down even further. When Sasuke reached the silver-haired ninja, he flopped down onto the grass without a word. He was supposed to be training to boost his speed to take advantage of his balanced and improved Sharingan, but he just couldn't keep his mind on it. He was clanless. He was homeless. He was dead to the people he cared for most. There didn't seem much point in trying. What was there to fight for? There's no point in training if you can't keep your mind focused, Kakashi said. So let's get your head in order. Sasuke felt no enthusiasm for this idea. What he wanted was for time to rewind so that the curse mark was back to being a secret, or even better back to before he'd even had the mark branded into his skin. There was no other way to make his world right again so that he could focus on improving his skills. It may feel like the end of the world, but it isn't, his Jonin mentor told him. How would you know? Sasuke snapped, suddenly angry instead of numb. You've never been cast out like trash. No, Kakashi readily admitted. But my friend was after his death. The Jonin briefly touched his crooked hitayate that covered his implanted Sharingan eye. I don't suppose you've ever heard a word about Uchiha Obito, have you? No, the boy hesitantly replied. What did he do wrong? He gave me his eye as he lay dying, the Jonin explained. When the Uchiha were unable to pressure the Hokage into forcing me into giving up the Sharingan, they disowned him in death and erased all records of his existence that they could. They considered him a traitor. But, why? Sasuke frowned. It's not like he gave his eyes to an enemy or a foreign village. I'm not an Uchiha, Kakashi shrugged. It probably didn't help any that they already didn't think much of me. I am the last of my line, and my father died in deep disgrace which didn't reflect well on me in their view. Your father? Sasuke asked slowly. When he'd uncovered the name, Hatake Asekumo, he'd wondered how closely he was related to his sensei, but he'd never asked the Jonin about it. From the first training session after the Forest of Death, Sasuke had the feeling that Kakashi was a bit frosty towards him. He didn't know if the Jonin suspected him somehow in Naruto's attack, or if his mildly guilty conscience was just twisting the man's normal laid-back attitude into something less friendly in his own mind. So he'd never brought up the subject of werewolves and just kept his mind completely on whatever training the Jonin set him to for the day. He contracted lycanthropy, his sensei said matter-of-factly. The Uchiha have a vendetta against werewolves to the point that I was suspicious by association. Sasuke fidgeted with one of his wrist weights before gathering up the nerve to take advantage of the subject brought up. Was he different after he was bitten? It's hard to say, was Kakashi's unhelpful answer. The boy furrowed his brow in confusion and peeked up at his teacher's face. What little he could see of Kakashi's expression was as uninformative as it usually was. He frowned a bit and internally debated on whether or not he should ask again. The lecture on werewolves had taught that victims of the curse suffered changes in personality before exposure to the full moon caused them to fully succumb. They usually became increasingly irritable, aggressive, irrational, and paranoid. Naruto hadn't seemed to possess those traits, but he could be an atypical werewolf whose only outward sign before changing with the moon was silver sensitivity. Naruto has to be some kind of mutant werewolf, Sasuke thought, remembering his fight against the Inyazuka. The changes in his face, his eyes, and those stupid marks on his cheeks, it wasn't like anything they taught in the academy or in the old records I read. And the restraint he exercised. When latent werewolves go feral from stress, they're supposed to be like wild animals, no distinction between friend or foe, no ability to stop their attack unless they're knocked out. Naruto didn't try to kill Kiba or tear him into pieces when he was down. As soon as he was out, Naruto stopped going after him. Werewolves aren't supposed to be able to do that. Not in that state. And he has to be a werewolf. Father wouldn't have gone after him like that if he wasn't. He changed, Kakashi said suddenly. But I'm not sure if the curse was the real cause of it. I think his fear of what he might become if he wasn't careful, and the wary stares and whispers of the village as they waited for him to break, was what did it. The Jonin pulled out a kunai and used it to cut a few frayed threads hanging from one sleeve. My sensei never acted like my father did. Sasuke blinked and opened his mouth to ask. Kakashi-san, Sasuke, you're using this field. The boy and his teacher turned to see Iruka wandering into view. The academy Chunin didn't look like he was in a particularly good mood. But he nodded to them politely as he approached for their answer. We're on break right now, Kakashi replied, swapping his kunai for his little orange book with the mature content warning stamped on it. If you've come for information, I don't have anything new yet. Actually, I might have some information for you, Iruka snorted. Apparently Naruto's mother has come to the village. Sasuke stiffened in a fleeting flash of a half-remembered nightmare of the red-haired woman from the photograph strangling him and screaming about betrayal darted through his mind. Really? The silver-haired man asked, raising his one visible eye from the pages of his adult novel. I was speaking with Hokage-sama and she barged into his office like she belonged there, and Hokage-sama referred to her as Naruto's mother, the Chunin replied. Did she have long red hair? The Jonin inquired. At Iruka's nod, Kakashi looked around and then hurriedly shoved his book back into his weapon pouch. That would be Kushina-san, Kakashi said. And this bothers you, Irika. It might, the Chunin admitted. She acted upset when she heard that something might have happened to Naruto, but after giving him up and then waiting so long to bother and find him again, I doubt her sincerity. That sounds like a reasonable conclusion, Sasuke thought as he adjusted one of his ankle weights. Naruto was dumped in the foster system due to pressure from his extended family as I understand it. And Naruto loves his mother. Kakashi raised his eyebrow. I don't suppose you've talked with Naruto about his family situation? No, the subject seemed to upset him and I didn't feel it was a good idea to pry. If he wanted me to know about it he would have told me, Irika responded. And children tend to gloss over their parents' faults. After so many years away from her, with her as his only parent, and after so many different foster homes, a lot of them probably unpleasant, it's probable that he's romanticized his memories of her. The Jonin glanced around again before looking back at the academy instructor. You haven't shared your opinions with Kushina-san, have you? No, we really didn't speak, Irika answered. Good, you'll live longer, Kakashi cheerfully informed him. She's dangerous. The Chunin asked dubiously. Well, the older ninja said, in my experience, her revenge is non-fatal and prank-based, but no one's ever done anything as serious as try to kill her child. I don't think she'll be in a forgiving mood for a while. Irika frowned and started to give a response. A rumbling boom caught their attention. Every now and then there was an explosion or a boom out in the training fields. That was the area's purpose, to practice ninja skills, such as destructive elemental jutsu, explosive traps, and the like. But then there was another bang, and then the creaking sound of a falling tree, and another boom. It wasn't normal to hear so much destruction so close together. Who the heck is doing all that? Sasuke wondered. Kakashi darted up a tree to investigate. Irika followed and Sasuke went after him. When they reached the tree's crown and looked around, it wasn't hard to spy the epicenter of destruction with all the dust clouds rising up from it. There was at least one training ground between them and the field where all hell was breaking loose, far away enough to be safe, but just close enough for them to catch a few details. Another tree was torn down as they watched, and as it toppled a flash of blue-white chain snapped through the air like a whip. That chain, Sasuke mused. Didn't I see something like that before? Kushina-san is angry, the Jonin remarked. As if to punctuate his words, a tornado of water rose dozens of yards over the treetops, sucking up clumps of leaves with its shredding white water as it wriggled and writhed over the distant spot where it had been cast. A chill slithered down Sasuke's spine. Naruto's mother can do that? Kushina dropped to the dirt, panting and soaked in sweat. She'd burned up most of her chakra, and if she spent any more she'd need to spend a day or two in bed to recover. And if she destroyed any more of the field she'd probably get in trouble. So far, she'd killed at least a dozen trees, if not more. She'd used a stream that cut through a corner of the space to fuel several nasty sudden attacks that had left most of the ground muddy and mangled. And she had smashed every single training post and painted target that she could find. The Chunin fixer squad who drew this duty was going to hate her. I still want to kill him. Of course, she couldn't. Fugaku was head of the Uchiha clan, and somehow incredibly popular amongst them. If she knocked him off, the entire Uchiha clan would come after her and her family, and they wouldn't stop until they felt satisfied with the carnage. Now, with her wrath clouded by weariness, she conceded to herself that it wouldn't be worth the cost to eviscerate Fugaku and hang his bloody shorts from the nearest flagpole. But I still want to kill him. Really, how dare he? How dare he even dream of touching her son? Minato's son? How dare that bloodthirsty zealot think he was above the law, above the Hokage's authority? How dare he? Her fingers drew furrows into the damp earth as they curled into a shaking fist. If she hadn't had her necklace on, she would probably be full fox by now out of sheer outrage. She also would have most likely burned the training ground down to ashes and damaged the adjacent ones too. Naruto, I'll be seeing you soon. The old man had promised her that she would her son soon. And she had absolute faith that he would keep that promise. Sarutobi Hiruzen was an honorable man, and when he made a promise he did all that he could to keep it. That, and his incredible jutsu knowledge, was why he was so respected inside and outside of Hinokuni. Soon, maybe even as soon as tomorrow, she would get to see her baby again. Back in Uzu, the photograph Jiraiya had brought her had almost been enough. But now that she was here and so very close, it only made her more anxious to see her son in the flesh, to hear his voice, to smell him, to cry all over him and no doubt embarrass the heck out of him. And now that she knew that he'd been hurt, it made the situation even more unbearable. It didn't matter that she'd been told that he was healing well, she needed to see it for herself. Only then would the tightness in her chest ease. Hold on, Naru-chan, I'll see you soon. Her vision started to waver and she sniffled, rubbing at her eyes with the back of one hand. Minato, I wish you were here. He was putting the finishing touches on the last of his paperwork when an odd sneeze interrupted him. Frowning, he rubbed at his nose before getting back to writing. If he believed in the old superstition about sneezes, he might have thought that someone was talking about him. But who would mention his name now? I've been gone so long I don't think anyone even curses my name anymore, he thought to himself. Once he had completed the report to his satisfaction, he stacked the papers on the kitchen counter to turn in later and poured himself a cup of coffee. Sipping at his hot drink, he strolled upstairs and peeked into Naruto's room. The boy was still sleeping off a late but large breakfast and there was no reason to wake him. Ever since he'd woken up yesterday, he'd been doing much better. He hadn't thrown up, his fever was long gone, and he'd even shuffled off to the bathroom unassisted a few times. With plenty of sleep and extra calories, he should recover quickly, perhaps in time for the next full moon, which was only 4 days away. Smiling faintly, he closed the door to Naruto's room and headed back to the kitchen. It was an immense relief that Naruto had pulled through. When the boy, his son, had first been moved to the house, it had been touch and go with medics coming in shifts while he spent almost every hour watching over Naruto, even sleeping in the corner of his room in case something happened. Of course, now that Naruto was going to live, he had a whole new slew of problems to worry about. So far, he'd kept his mask on around the boy when he was awake. The Hokage had told him that Naruto hadn't recognized his picture and probably wouldn't know his face, but he didn't want to risk it and have his son get upset and perhaps even ranger himself over his identity. Thankfully Naruto was sleeping a lot so far and hadn't yet asked why he was hanging out in a house in full gear all the time. And how would Naruto take the full moon? A disturbance in his alert seals followed by a coded knock at the back door had him slipping on his mask, temporarily abandoning his cup of coffee, and heading off to see what the update was. It took a moment to disarm the seals he'd set into the door to protect against intrusion before he cracked it open. Crane was waiting for him. Uzumaki Kushina arrived in the village today, Crane informed him. Hokage-sama promised her visitation as soon as possible. Mangetsu was stunned for a minute. Before he'd heard that she was really a kitsune, he probably would have arranged for another probably Yamato, he liked that kid, to guard Naruto so that he could ask the Hokage's permission to meet up with her to get reacquainted before bringing her to see their son. But now, he really had no idea what to think. What time do you think would be best? Crane prompted. Oh. Tomorrow afternoon, Mangetsu decided. He should be awake then. All right, Crane nodded. Tomorrow afternoon it is. With that decided, Crane took his leave and Mangetsu re-secured the door. He skulked back to the kitchen, pulled off his mask, and flopped down into his chair. The stared into his coffee and let out a deep sigh. Kushina. Chapter 32, Surprise. Hinata dutifully followed her teacher through the quiet residential neighborhood towards the training grounds to help Shino prepare. She still hadn't heard from her father about her sealing into the branch family, but she would be patient. He was probably more concerned with preparing Neji for his demon slaying in the village stadium for the final trial. Once the trials were through, he would have a date for her to undergo the sealing procedure. Kurenye-sensei had kindly taken her in after her father had turned her out of the house. She felt bad for taking up room and resources and kept trying to find ways to help her teacher out by doing chores. Kurenai assured her that it wasn't necessary, but Hinata was happy to help clean the Jounin's house and cook the meals. It was the least that she could do. Her mentor lived in a very nice neighborhood mostly populated with civilian families. All the little houses were neat and orderly with well-kept lawns and gardens. It felt warm and friendly and Hinata was ashamed to admit to herself that she liked it a little bit better than the Hugo lands. But there was one house that just didn't fit in. It had belonged to an old woman years ago, and upon her death the property had been acquired by a bank. However, they had never been able to sell it, so the building sat vacant and in increasing disrepair. At least once a year genin teams were hired to perform maintenance on the property to keep it up to code, but still no one bought it. The paint was faded and peeling, the windows were filthy, the lawn was overgrown, and the trees in the backyard looked like a small forest. It sat quietly near the end of the block, and everyone tried to pretend that it didn't exist. Hinata had overheard some young children whispering about how it was haunted. Hinata glanced at the abandoned house as she and Kurenye-sensei walked past it. Even though it was inanimate, she thought it looked sad. Everyone ignored it and let it slowly decay. Perhaps one day, when she was old enough and had the money, she'd buy it and fix it up. It was the perfect sort of house for a branch hyuga, and just large enough for a family if she was arranged to marry. Just as she was looking back ahead, a flicker of movement in one of the grimy windows made her do a double take. She hesitated, and for just a moment she allowed her imagination to run wild with ideas of ghosts and the supernatural. But then she shook herself and hurried a bit to catch up to her sensei. There are no such things as ghosts, she thought. It was probably just a draft moving a curtain, or an animal that found its way inside. That's all. Peeking at the house with her Byakugan to check never crossed her mind. She was well conditioned against using her Kekai Genkai for frivolous reasons. She wasn't about to risk violating the privacy of the neighbors just because she was curious about a ghost. I need to focus on helping Shino-kun. Naruto was bored. He was too tired to hop up and run around in search of entertainment, but he was too awake to sleep anymore. And it was only his second day, that he could remember, in this house being guarded by the Umbu Mangetsu. So bored. He'd explored the upstairs of the house thoroughly around his bathroom breaks. There was his room, the bathroom, a hall closet, 3 vacant rooms of various sizes, and Mangetsu's bedroom. The place where the Umbu slept was almost identical to Naruto's. The mattress laid directly on the floor, it was just bigger with different colored sheets, the table lamp was on the floor, and there was a box in the corner with assorted bits of clothes and ninja gear. Naruto squirmed a bit on the bed and glanced over at a laundry basket near the door. There was a bunch of clothes in it, all his in size, all brand new. A few even still had the price tags attached. But not a single one belonged to him. Is it really so hard to go to Iruka-sensei's apartment and get my stuff? Even though his clothes were worn to death and close to falling apart, he liked them. They were his clothes. He'd bought most of them from clearance racks and thrift stores with his own allowance. They were in colors he liked, with patterns that he liked, and he felt comfortable in them. The stuff in the laundry basket was all in shades of white, blue, and gray. He'd found a few green things and a red shirt, but there was nothing orange at all. It was all so bland and dull. Naruto stuck his tongue out at the basket and stiffly shifted so that he was looking at the window. The window had been covered with a sheet tapped around the edges while he'd been suffering from the poison coating the silver knife. Mangetsu told him that he'd been sensitive to bright lights when he'd been sick. It had also been something of a security measure, no one could peek in and see him laying there helpless. Now that the window was uncovered, he couldn't really see a whole lot. It let in some sunlight, but most of what he could see was the top of some tree. Beyond giving him a clue as to the time of day and what the weather was like, it didn't do much for him. It gave him no clue as to his exact location, but he knew that he was still in Konoha. His Umbu babysitter had told him so when he'd asked yesterday. The situation wasn't bad enough to risk moving him out of the village and away from Konoha's expert doctors, which he'd needed due to his injuries. He'd probably stay here until his wounds were fully healed, but after that, he didn't know where he'd go. The boy fingered the edge of his sheet and then his hand slid towards the bandages on his neck and left shoulder. His injuries really didn't hurt unless he moved too much or too fast. It was really annoying to have to be careful of the way he moved around, and he hoped he healed up faster. Naruto sighed and very slowly sat up. With great care he climbed off the mattress, hissing softly as his right side protested. Scowling a bit out of irritation, he slowly shuffled to the door and then out of the room. The upstairs was a barren place. Most of the rooms were empty, and the rooms that weren't had only the bare necessities in them. There were no pictures hanging on the wall or plants on window sills or any sort of added decoration anywhere. It was like no one lived here and he and the Umbunin were just squatting on the property like homeless people. I wonder if the downstairs is any different. He hadn't made it to the ground floor yet. The stairs seemed too steep when he'd looked at them before. He worried that if he tried to go down them it would hurt his side or that he might slip and make his injuries worse. When his shuffling brought him to the top of the stairs, he hesitated. The steps were made of slick wood without any carpet to give him good traction and the railing looked a bit wobbly. If he tried them, the risk of slipping and tumbling to the bottom felt huge. I feel like such a sissy, he pouted. They're just a bunch of stupid stairs. Maybe I should get Mangetsu to help me. From what Naruto knew, Umbu was made up of the most loyal and the most badass warriors in the village. They ran around the country in white armor and decorated masks doing whatever the Hokage needed them to do. Umbu were silent and stoic and mysterious and no one ever wanted to mess with them. Mangetsu, however, seemed to be a very friendly person. Naruto had yet to see him out of his uniform or without his mask, or see him do anything at all badass. It was like he was a nice babysitter in an intimidating costume. No, Naruto decided. I'll be 13 in a few months. I can handle this. I'll just go slow. Clutching at the banister with his right hand and started his painfully slow descent. The first step went okay, and so did the second, and the third, and the fourth. But somewhere around the seventh step he set his foot too close to the edge, lost his balance, slipped. Yah! Before he could hit the stairs and start his tumble, a set of arms caught him. Naruto cracked open one eye and found that in the space that he'd slipped and braced himself for awful impact that Mangetsu had appeared and caught him. The man held him still for a moment and then carefully set him back on his feet on the step that had given him trouble. The Umbu studied him for a long moment before asking, Naruto, what are you doing? I'm bored, the boy half shrugged. I wanted to go downstairs. You could have asked me for help, Mangetsu chided. I shouldn't need help. Naruto huffed. Well, for now, you do, the Umbu told him. Then, before Naruto could protest, the man scooped him up and carried him down the rest of the stairs and deposited him on the ground floor. Naruto scowled and adjusted the blue pajamas he was wearing before peering around. And it found that it was just like the upstairs, only that it was downstairs. There were no pictures on the walls, no plants, no nothing. All of the curtains were drawn, the front door was shut and locked, and the one room that he could see had a couch, an unplugged television set, and a stack of cardboard boxes in it. It was like someone was starting to move in, but they'd never gotten unpacked. Naruto did the old man shuffle along a hallway, peeking into every room that he passed. He found several other barren rooms, another hall closet, empty as the one upstairs, another bathroom, and the kitchen. There were at least a few things in the kitchen, like a table, a coffee maker, a few dishes in the sink, but it still felt unlived in. If you're thinking of wandering outside, don't, Mangetsu advised, making Naruto flinch. He hadn't heard the Umbu following him at all. I wasn't going to, Naruto insisted, tearing his eyes away from what was probably the back door, just outside of the kitchen. All right, the man said. Just giving you a heads up that that's off limits until you're cleared for it. Great, the genin pouted. That sucks. Are you hungry? The Umbu asked. No, not yet, Naruto grumbled. Mangetsu had made him a big breakfast and it was still a bit too early for lunch. And you're still bored? Yes, Naruto replied, rolling his eyes a bit. Stupid question, of course I am. I might have a solution to that problem, Mangetsu said and gently steered Naruto back to the room by the stairs with the couch, TV, and boxes in it. After settling the boy on the couch, the Umbu dug through one of the boxes. Naruto poked at the couch cushions suspiciously. The piece of furniture had definitely seen better days. It was the sort of thing that had probably been rescued from a neighbor who had been ready to throw it away. Aha! The Umbu muttered and pulled out something flat in a rattling cloth pouch. The man moved one of the larger boxes in front of the couch like a makeshift coffee table. The flat thing turned out to be a checkerboard and the game pieces were in the little bag. As the Umbu set up the game, Naruto stared blankly at it. It wasn't like what he'd played Oakamijiji with. The board wasn't discolored, stained, warped, or mildewed. And the pieces were all uniform plastic, not replaced with bottle caps, colored pebbles, or lonely chess pieces. Mangetsu's checker set was brand new and pristine, not recycled and well-loved like the werewolves. Now do you want to play as the red? I don't want to play, Naruto interrupted. You don't? The Umbu almost sounded hurt, which was really weird because they'd never played together before. Are you sure? I'm sure, Naruto mumbled, leaning sideways against the couch arm. Okay. Mangetsu sighed and nudged the box that the checkerboard was resting on off to the side. Well, let's see if I can't get this television working. The boy laid his cheek against the couch arm and watched the man plug in the television and then go on a scavenger hunt for the remote. Checkers was the game that he played with Oakamijiji. Seeing the game board reminded him of the sickly old werewolf, and how the poor creature had died all alone. Naruto didn't want to play the game with anyone else. Hey, Mangetsu, Naruto mumbled, do you think someone could get my clothes from Eureka-sensei's? You don't like the clothes here? The Umbu asked, again sounding strangely hurt as he adjusted his canine mask. They're boring, the boy complained. Too much blue. All right, Mangetsu said as he searched the last box for the missing remote. I'll see if anyone has the time to do that. Thanks, Naruto yawned. A minute later the remote turned up, but when the Umbu tried to use it, nothing happened. I'll also have to ask for batteries, I think, Mangetsu grumbled. There aren't any batteries here. Naruto blinked. I never needed any, the man shrugged as he left the remote on top of the television. I don't watch much TV. Naruto sighed and sank even deeper into the couch. He was getting a bit tired, but not enough to take another nap. And he was still really bored. Do you think I could get some visitors? The blonde boy asked. Actually, you're scheduled to have a visitor this afternoon, Mangetsu informed him. Huh? Naruto tilted his head to the side. Sparrow. No, she'll be stopping by this evening. This visitor is special. Well, who is it? The boy inquired. It's a surprise, the Umbu replied, and it sounded like he was smiling. You can't tell me? Naruto whined. That wouldn't make it a surprise anymore, the man chuckled. All I can say is that you will like this visitor. How do you know? The genin demanded. I'm an Umbu, I know everything, Mangetsu said quite seriously. Naruto stared at him uncertainly. Liar. You're as bad as Kakashi-sensei. Kakashi lies now. Mangetsu murmured, intrigued. Yeah, you don't know that. The boy frowned. I've been away for a while, the Umbu explained. I haven't gotten caught up on everything quite yet. Kakashi-sensei didn't always tell silly lies to explain why he was late. Naruto wondered in disbelief. No, he was always on time if he wasn't early, Mangetsu responded. Obito was the late one with the excuses. Kakashi-sensei, on time. Naruto sputtered. No way. Ask him if you don't believe me, the man shrugged. I will, Naruto decided. Is he the one who's coming to visit? No. Well, who is it? It's a surprise, Mangetsu cheerfully repeated. Naruto glowered at the man. Umbunin are evil. Kushina did almost nothing between her venting session and noon of the next day. She ate, she showered, she slept, and that was pretty much it. But as her afternoon appointment neared, she rolled out of her hotel bed and began her preparations. She washed her hair, brushed her teeth, and threw on some casual clothes, a pair of jeans and a blue t-shirt, and tied her hitayate around her neck. Then she went through her pack, sorting out what to leave in her hotel room and what she was going to bring with her on her visit. And then she headed out to pick up a snack and wait for her escort. Her guide found her at a dango stand. He was an Umbu with a feline mask. The man waited patiently on a nearby roof while she made her purchase. With her carton of sweets in hand, she turned and walked towards the building he was sitting on. Whoa-hey! Her shoulder banged into another person and she nearly dropped her dango. With a snarl she tightened her grip on her snack and turned to chew out the careless other party. But the words died in her throat when she saw who it was. Mikoto looked awful. Her normally put-together friend was pale with shadows forming under her dark eyes. Her posture was slumped instead of upright and confident. She was clean and well-dressed, but the mood surrounding her made her seem rumpled, like she'd rolled out of bed and just gone through the motions. "You look like crap," Kushina told her. It took a good minute or two for Mikoto to focus on her and then recognize her. Instead of the little polite smile she always managed to give people even when she was having a rough day, she thinned her lips into something approaching a frown. "It's a fine time for you to show up." Kushina raised an eyebrow. "Sure, your husband's in jail, but he's a dick and deserves it, so what do you have to be mad about?" She'd never really liked her friend's husband. When she'd heard that Mikoto was going to marry Fugaku, it had taken real restraint on her part to not treat the wedding like it was a funeral. The man was older than her friend by over 5 years, and he seemed to be in a permanently bad mood, lacking any sense of humor at all. Kushina was sure that if the man ever gave a genuine smile, the world would end. It was beyond her why her intelligent, independent friend would willingly subordinate herself to such a man. But Mikoto married him without complaint or protest. By the time that Itachi was born, she even seemed to actually love the man, somehow. 13 years without a word, and then you just decide to show up out of the blue at the worst possible time. Mikoto snapped. "Better late than never." The redhead hazarded. "This is not a time to joke around." The Uchiha woman glared. "Is Fugaku being in prison that awful?" Kushina asked slowly. "Or is there something else?" "Enough with your juvenile insults against my husband." Mikoto barked, her composure rapidly deteriorating. "Everything is falling apart and I can't deal with you right now." The situation was utterly bizarre. Normally it would be Kushina raging against some indignity or other while Mikoto calmly rode it out. Now it seemed that their roles had reversed. Mikoto was the one falling apart while Kushina weathered the storm. "I'm going to assume that something else is going on that I haven't heard about yet," the Uzumaki said. "My baby's been disowned." Mikoto almost sobbed. "Itachi's been disowned." Kushina blinked. "No." The Uchiha snapped. "Sasuke. You didn't read any of the letters that I sent, did you?" "I read them," the redhead insisted. "I just didn't write back because all the things I wanted to bitch about were clan or village secrets, so there wouldn't be anything left after they were censored. I didn't feel like wasting paper and postage." She paused and thought back to the handful of old letters she'd started receiving not long after Naruto's problem had been uncovered. "I remember, baby number 2 you named Sasuke. I was sort of confused because the picture that came with that letter looked kinda girly." Mikoto trembled and looked ready to cry, so Kushina snagged her arm and dragged her to a gap between buildings so there would be fewer observers. "So, what did Sasuke do?" "He didn't do anything," the dark-haired woman whimpered. "Orochimaru branded him with a curse mark." "Ouch," Kushina muttered, managing to find a scrap of sympathy for the kid. "It could be worse though. Orochimaru could have kidnapped and dissected him. Do you know where he's staying?" I think his sensei took him in," Mikoto gulped, hugging herself. "Well, that's good," the Uzumaki said, trying to sound enthusiastic. "I'd love to chat more, but I need to get going. I have a kid of my own to see." Her friend looked confused. "You know," Kushina said, tucking her dango box under one arm and adjusting the straps of her bag. "Naruto, the boy your husband tried to murder in broad daylight." Mikoto turned ashen. I didn't." Later, the Uzumaki waved and walked across the street to meet up with her guide. She had no desire to talk about what had happened to her son. If she did, she was likely to work herself back up into a burning rage. And the longer she talked, the later she'd be. Uzumaki Kushina was not going to be late visiting her boy. Naruto slurped up his ramen noodle lunch as he sat at the kitchen table. It wasn't cheap instant ramen, but the real stuff brought to him by Spider from Ichiraku. And after he thoroughly enjoyed eating it, he planned on taking a nap. Mangetsu watched him from the back door where he stood with his shoulder braced against the wall. The Umbu still hadn't told him who the visitor was. All he would say was that Naruto was guaranteed to like the mystery person. How can he be so sure that I'll like this guy? Naruto pondered as he chewed on a bit of egg. He doesn't know me. Something on your mind, Naruto? Doesn't it bother you to have to look after me? Naruto asked, knowing that if he brought up the surprise visitor he'd only get frustrated. Isn't it boring? I don't mind at all, the Umbu chuckled. I was going to be looking after you anyway as I was going to be your trainer. Really? Naruto blinked, stirring his chopsticks through the soup broth in search of more noodles. Mangetsu nodded. Are you still going to train me when I'm better? The boy asked. Yes, I. He suddenly fell silent, and before Naruto could ask why there was a pattern of knocks on the door. Mangetsu put one palm against the door, which glowed and hummed for a minute. Then he opened the door, staying behind it so that whoever had been knocking wouldn't see him. Why? The noodles in his chopsticks slipped free with a wet splat as time slowed down like cold syrup. She swept through the back door and into the kitchen, oblivious to anyone else but him. Her blue-gray eyes immediately locked on his face and she stopped a few feet short of the boy to stare at him. Naruto stared back open-mouthed, unable to trust his eyes. Mommy? The red-haired woman dropped a backpack onto the floor, set some kind of takeout container near his ramen, and then kneeled beside his chair. Her fingers trembled as they traced the whisker-like lines on his cheeks. When he didn't flinch, she gave him a wavering smile as her eyes misted over. This is a dream. She can't be here. I must have fallen asleep. I know it's been a while, his mother's voice said, but do you remember me, Naruto? Time returned to normal speed and Naruto flung his arms around her neck, falling out of his chair in his haste to attach himself to her so that she couldn't disappear, and he cried into her shoulder. Mommy. Chapter 33, Questionable Sanity. It hurt watching them. His chest knotted up as he observed mother and son cling to each other and cry. After a 5-minute-long eternity, he slipped out of his hiding place between the wall and the door and exited into the backyard. You're leaving? Yamato asked quietly. I need some air, Mangetsu replied, amazing himself with his even tone. You can stay, can't you? Yes, but... He didn't wait to hear whatever else Yamato wanted to say. He used his hiration and was gone before the other Umbu could utter another syllable. In less than a heartbeat he moved from the overgrown backyard to the other side of the village, reappearing in a tree nearby the academy. This particular tree had always been important to him. As a young boy he would sit under it or climb it after classes to read, daydream, or think. When he was older, he'd sometimes visit it after missions. And then he'd brought Kushina to it and shared it with her. He'd liked it so much that he'd branded one of his seal markers by his favorite sitting spot up in the branches so that he could visit whenever he wanted to from wherever he was. As much as he was hurt and confused by learning that Kushina wasn't human, he was still attached to her. Throughout his long years of exile he'd ached for her and to suddenly see her again. And to watch her and their child reunited. It had taken all of his self-control to stay back and not join them. He wasn't sure how Kushina would react exactly, probably some mixture of confusion, anger, and joy, if he was lucky. But he knew that Naruto wouldn't welcome him. With what his son had suffered recently, Naruto deserved an uninterrupted reunion with his mother. He deserved to be happy and to have Kushina's undivided attention, at least for the day. The boy could wait to meet his father, a meeting that was bound to be unpleasant from Naruto's perspective. The Umbu exhaled shakily and leaned back, resting his head against the rough bark of the tree. Watching Kushina hug and cry over Naruto, it was hard for him to imagine that she didn't love the boy. And all of the memories he had of his relationship with Kushina felt genuine. He couldn't believe that she'd been faking it or using him in some way. But he couldn't blindly trust his heart. Not with Kitsune involved. True, a lot of what hunters knew about demons was flawed, if not outright false. He'd not only seen the truth about werewolves, but a good dozen other species as well. There had been times that he'd received charity from friendly Tanuki and Crane Tengu, and once he'd spent some time at an inn in the land of birds run by Sparrow Tengu, earning his keep with some maintenance work and dishwashing. And Hokage-sama was extending the Uzumaki clan the benefit of the doubt. The Uzumaki had been helpful to the infant Leaf Village, even as their race was systematically hunted down. The first Hokage had even married an Uzumaki. However, the rest of Uzushiagaku no Sato, a place exclusively populated by Kitsune, was under suspicion. From what he knew, they were forming ties between Otagaku no Sato, a young village believed to have strong connections to Orochimaru. And they were padding their forces with other demon races, almost like they were building a small army. Mangetsu groaned and briefly removed his mask to rub a gloved hand over his face. Uzushio's motives were Hokage-sama's concern, not his. Kushina was the only kitsune that he needed to worry about. And sometime after the upcoming full moon, he would arrange for someone else to watch Naruto so that he could track her down and speak with her himself. I think I'll head back in 2 hours, he decided, adjusting his radio. Unless I get called back sooner. Yamanaka Ino stretched her arms above her head as she stepped out of the family flower shop after her shift. A hand briefly brushed against the little bun she'd tucked her shortened hair into before forcing her hands down to her sides and striding off on her errand. Her mother had asked her to pick up a few things for dinner, and Ino loved visiting the markets and listening for scraps of juicy gossip that hadn't made it to Yamanaka Hana yet. I wish I hadn't cut my hair, Ino fussed as she briefly consulted the list her mother had given her. It's going to take forever to grow it back out again. She'd first grown it out when she'd decided that Uchiha Sasuke was really cute and she wanted to attract his attention. That act had led to the end of her friendship with Sakura, as her pink-haired best friend hadn't wanted to compete with a friend over the same boy. It had saddened her that she and her old friend didn't talk anymore, but sometimes it had been fun competing with her as a rival. And she couldn't ever be mad at Sakura for being attracted to the same boy. What girl didn't want to make Uchiha Sasuke their boyfriend? He was very cute with the strong potential to grow up to be the classic dark, tall and handsome man. Since he didn't really have any friends outside of his rather isolationist clan, he was very mysterious. And being part of the powerful Uchiha clan practically made him royalty. Really, what girl didn't want to win the heart of a handsome prince? Ino had been sure that she would be the one to triumph and become Sasuke's girlfriend. She was pretty, confident, a competent kunoichi, and she was from a prominent clan herself. Sakura might be a bit smarter, have interesting colored hair, and earned better grades, but Ino had been certain that she'd win their contest and the boy and end up a princess to match Sasuke's prince-like status. But now, things are just a mess. Sasuke wasn't an Uchiha anymore. He'd been disowned for some reason. There were all sorts of crazy rumors flying around as to why, even though it had happened only yesterday. And that was just the latest tsunami of gossip inundating the village. Before Sasuke's disgrace was being whispered about, people were talking about the incident that had occurred shortly after the end of the Forest of Death segment of the trials. The true nature of this incident was about as certain as the cause of Sasuke getting booted from the Uchiha, but there were a lot of stories about it. Some claimed that top-ranked members of the Uchiha clan had tried to commit a murder and they were caught by members of Umbu. Others said that the Uchiha were just minding their own business and were attacked by Umbu out of the blue and a few of them had been killed. And other variations claimed that there was a werewolf involved somehow, someone got bitten, and a plague of werewolves would arise within the village walls by the time winter rolled around. It didn't matter what the truth was, the nature of the stories had everyone anxious. The Uchiha were powerful and dangerous opponents, but they were very mysterious even to their allies. They kept to themselves in a single neighborhood surrounded by a wall with only one major gateway to the rest of the village. Even though they were the military police, which earned them love and respect from the civilians, they still had an intimidating air about them that made people nervous. People could almost believe that the Uchiha would murder someone, but they didn't want to because it was so terrifying. It was a bit easier to believe that Umbu would attack them for some reason, as the Uchiha were known to grate under the authority of the Hokage, especially lately. But that left everyone to wonder about the reason the Hokage set his Umbu loose for, and, in the increasingly tense atmosphere of the village, would the Umbu go hunting inside the Leaf's walls again? The possibility of a werewolf inside of Konoha really had people on edge. There were plenty of monsters out there that were more powerful, more dangerous, or more deadly than werewolves. But werewolves were the only creature that was significantly contagious, able to spread their curse to perfectly normal people and turn them into murderous beasts by the next full moon that would then spread the curse to yet more people. Ino yelped as she nearly collided with a cart in her distraction. Embarrassed, the blonde girl shook herself and continued on to the grocery store that her family favored. She'd missed a few turns while moving on autopilot and had to do a bit of backtracking to reach her destination. The girl quickly visiting the aisles and collected the ingredients her mother had listed. Ino added a few fresh fruits to her basket and then headed for the checkout lines. While she waited to pay for her items, She tuned her ears to gathering scraps of whispers of the other shoppers. Never had a trials like this. Do you think that this makeup prices don't seem? Would they really? Thinking about moving somewhere safe. But are you sure stray dogs can't carry werewolfism? Ino choked on a snort. Werewolfism wasn't a word, it was lycanthropy. And the idea of dogs being carriers of the curse was absurd. The curse only afflicted humans, and the only way that it could be spread was by a bite from a werewolf, a human consumed by the curse. Civilians have some weird ideas about demons. The Yamanaka paid for the groceries and left the store to walk home. I wonder how training went today. As she had been eliminated from the trials, Ino didn't always go to her team's training sessions anymore. Asuma-sensei primarily focused on Shikamaru as he was the only one still in the running for Chunin rank. To get the lazy Nara more active in his fights, Asuma had Chuji, and sometimes Ino, go after Shikamaru hard. The Nara in general were better suited to fighting human opponents. They liked to plan out attacks, lay traps, and most of their basic shadow techniques weren't lethal. A lone Nara pitted against an aggressive and less cerebral sort of demon didn't usually fare well, especially if the demon was an unexpected one. Shika's such a lazy ass, Ino mused. If he doesn't work harder in practice with us, the demon he has to fight in the stadium will probably eat him. What if he ends up fighting an Ani? Those things have thick skin and insane pain tolerances. Chopping off the head is the best way to kill them, but their necks are so thick, all tough muscle and... Hey, it's Sakura. Spying the pink-haired girl on the other side of the street immediately derailed Ino's worries about her teammate and got her thinking about Sasuke. Sakura was Sasuke's teammate, with access to the boy that Ino greatly envied. If anyone knew anything about what was going on with the suddenly ex-Uchiha, it would be her. Ino skipped across the street, swinging her grocery bag, and bumped her old classmate with her hip, causing the other girl to almost drop the collection of books that she was carrying in her arms. Hey, forward girl. Ino grinned. What are you up to? I'm walking home from the library, Sakura frowned, adjusting her hold on the books. What do you want, Ino pig? Just to talk, the blonde girl said, ignoring her ex-friend's irritation. So, how are your team's preparations for the final round going? Okay, I guess, the other girl shrugged. Kakashi-sensei's been spending all of his time training Sasuke-kun. He suggested I do some independent study because I won't be advancing. Since he said I'd be good for genjutsu or medical work with my chakra control, I've been reading books on the subjects. Ah, that's what all the books are for, Ino remarked. But what about Naruto? Isn't he helping Sasuke-kun train? Naruto is advancing, too, remember? So Kakashi-sensei arranged for someone else to work with him, Sakura replied. I haven't seen him since we left the Forest of Death. Oh yeah, he beat Kiba. I forgot, Ino grimaced and mentally kicked herself. The way that Naruto had won had really intrigued her. He'd copied the Inuzuka almost like he had the Sharingan. But with the rumor explosion, the whole fight had slipped her mind. Hey, you sound worried about him, billboard brow. You like him? I do not, the pink-haired girl scowled. Not like that. You care about Shikamaru and Chuji, don't you? It's just like that, she insisted. And, yes, I am a little bit worried. Why? Ino asked. Did Kakashi-sensei set him up to train with some psycho? No, I don't know, he didn't say exactly who would be teaching him. The Harano girl chewed on her lower lip for a good minute before speaking again. Yamanakas are experts on possession, right? Of course, Ino nodded. Well, during the survival test, we came to the bones of the Kyuubi. The what? The blonde girl repeated blankly. Weren't you paying attention to the lecture on Kitsune? Sakura frowned. Not really, Ino admitted, tossing her head to move her long bangs out of her eye. They're extinct, right? The details about them aren't really important. The other girl rolled her green eyes at this answer. The Kyuubi was the mightiest of the Kitsune and it tried to destroy Konoha, but the Shodai and Uchiha Madara killed him, she summarized. And the Kyuubi's bones are still laying half buried in the Forest of Death. My team got separated for a while, but when Naruto found his way back it was during that fight with the Oto Genin. Somehow he touched the bones or something, I didn't see, and it possessed him or something. What possessed him? Ino blinked. The Kyuubi. Sakura squeaked. How do you know that's what happened? The Yamanaka asked slowly. He changed, the pink-haired girl said, wide-eyed. He got fangs and claws and pointed ears, and the marks on his cheeks got darker, and his eyes were red with cat pupils, and there was this cloak of chakra around him. It was reddish and bubbling and shaped sort of like a fox. It moved around him like it was alive and there were chakra threads coming off it, running back to the bones, I think. Naruto didn't talk, he just growled and roared like an animal, he moved like an animal, and he tore into the Otonin like a monster. When they ran away, he turned to me, it was like he didn't know me. He was going to get me, but Lee-san returned and beat the chakra off of him. When he woke up later, he said he didn't remember it at all. Ino almost made a crack about how that was a great scary campfire story, but seeing Sakura's serious and scared expression made her hold her tongue and think about it. Did you tell your sensei about this? The blonde girl finally asked. Yes, Sakura nodded. He'd never heard about anything like it. And he didn't have any explanation for it. Ino mulled over the disturbing story before deciding what to do about it. Come on, Sakura. Huh. The other girl yelped as Ino dragged her along with her free hand. Where are we going? To talk to my daddy. Ino said with a grin. He'll know what's going on. And maybe after we figure out Naruto's deal, I can find out about Sasuke-kun, too. Naruto was in heaven. His mother had appeared. And she was real. He'd dreamed of his mother coming to wherever he was and spiriting him away countless times. But this time she was solid. When he wrapped his arms around her she didn't dissipate into smoke. He could smell her, although she smelled a bit different than he remembered, and feel the warmth of her skin and feel her long red hair tickle him. She was real and she was there with him. When he was through crying and she was through crying, she looked at his bandages and cried a bit more. After he promised that he was alright, that he'd be just fine, she calmed down and they'd split the container of dango that she'd brought with her and he finished off the last of his now lukewarm ramen. Then he brought his mother to the living room so that they could sit on the couch together and talk. Nice boxes, she remarked when she noticed the cardboard boxes stacked by the windows, next to the television set. What's in them? I dunno, Naruto shrugged. Mangetsu stuff. Mangetsu. The umbu looking after me. Naruto looked over the back of the couch for the blonde-haired man with the dog mask, but the only person he spotted was a different umbu with a feline mask. Hey, where'd he go? He's not still hiding behind the door, is he? Why did he even do that? He went for a walk, the other umbu said. I'll stay until he comes back. Okay, Naruto nodded slowly. It was a bit disquieting to find that Mangetsu, the constant presence in the house, was suddenly gone. As far as Naruto knew, that umbu had stayed with him the entire time that he'd been sick. With Mangetsu away, he felt oddly vulnerable, but only for a moment. Now that Mom's here, he doesn't need to stick around and nursemaid me anymore. So, Naruto turned back to his mother, when are we leaving? Leaving? His mother tilted her head in confusion. What do you mean, Naru-chan? Well, I can't stay here, Naruto frowned. Sasuke had boasted to him a few times about how when an Uchiha went after a target, they'd hunt it down no matter where it fled until they had eliminated it. Since Naruto had survived, the Uchiha would surely come after him to finish the job. If he stayed in Konoha they wouldn't leave him alone until he was dead. Isn't that why you're here? The boy asked. To come get me? Oh, no, sweetie, she said softly and tapped the metal plate of the Uzushio Hitai dangling around her neck. I'm here on official business for the clan. A stab of betrayal hit Naruto in the heart. And you can't just leave Konoha, she continued. You're sworn yourself to serve Hokage-sama. If you just up and leave without permission you'll be labeled a rogue. But, he whimpered, his chest constricting, the Uchiha. Don't you worry about them, his mother said with a snort. They're in a lot of trouble for what they've done. Fugaku is in jail and if he tries to touch a hair on your head after he gets out, I'll rip off his head. What if he comes after me after you leave? He almost whispered. I don't plan on going back to Uzushiagaku, she told him, looping an arm around his shoulders, mindful of the bandages. I will do everything that I can to stay here, and if I have to leave for any reason I'll make sure that you're staying with Kakashi or Jiraiya until I come back. Heck, maybe I can even arrange to become a Konoha. Hearing that his mother would be staying with him relieved Naruto immensely and he sank back into the couch with a sigh. That would be funny, she snickered to herself. Me, a ninja of Konoha. He would have liked that. Who? Naruto inquired. Your father, his mother said, fidgeting with a long lock of her red hair. The whiskered boy scrunched up his face in distaste. Don't make faces like that, she admonished. Now, I know I never really sat down and explained things properly, about why your father was never around and why you were so unpopular. I know why, Naruto muttered sourly. He was a werewolf and so am I. I read some books on monsters in civilian libraries and I looked for all the things everyone would complain about in me. It wasn't that hard to figure out. Your father was a werewolf, yes, she nodded. But you are a little more complicated. He eyed his mother nervously. She had to remember that cat-masked Umbu was still standing at the back of the room, listening. He knew that his mother was some kind of foxish demon, but if the Umbu found out he'd... Relax, she smiled tightly. Hokage-sama and most of his Umbu know about me and everyone else back in Uzunokuni being Kitsune. Don't worry about it. Naruto's eyes got wide and round. They know? Wait, he blinked. Kitsune? But, the lecture I listened to said they were extinct. That's what we wanted them to think, she smirked faintly. It makes life a lot easier when your enemies think you're dead so they stop looking. But... He racked his brains, going over all the facts that had been presented about Kitsune during that lesson. He'd remembered it really well because there had been a lot of eerie similarities to what he'd remembered of his mother's people. But, besides being extinct, there had been a few inconsistencies. What about the funny-colored fire and lightning? I never saw any of that. Of course not, she replied. The village is made of wooden buildings. If we threw Kitsunebai around the village it would have burned to the ground a long time ago. Practicing Kitsunebai and other demon-specific abilities is strictly limited to the training caves underneath the village and you were never allowed down there. What about the Kyuubi? Naruto asked weakly, grasping at straws. They said that he did terrible things and was the leader of all the Kitsune and they were all like him. I think you know that demon hunters get a lot wrong, his mother said. The Kyuubi no Yoko was a terrible monster, and some Kitsune followed him, all of them cruel and wicked like their leader. But the Kyuubi only led a small faction of Kitsune and all the rest hated him for all sorts of reasons, mostly because his bad behavior doomed us all. Naruto felt rather stupid now. He hadn't made the obvious connection between his mother's kind and the Kitsune. And he'd rationalized away his blue fire as some weird side effect of lycanthropy messing with a natural fire affinity. He paused and focused on initiating the change. It didn't hurt as much as it had when he'd fixed the messed up partial change when he'd woken up after recovering from the poison. But it took longer than he was used to, and he found himself starting to sweat a tiny bit from the strain. And then he generated a few flickers of blue flame around his claws so that his mother could see. So, this is Kitsunebai. Oh, yes, definitely. She was grinning wildly and kissed his cheek. You're lucky. Not all Hanyo can make any sort of Kitsunebai. Most of them can, but not all of them. But I thought I was a werewolf, Naruto blinked, letting the flames sputter out. He didn't bother to banish the demonic features right away, he didn't feel up to forcing the change when his abilities still seemed out of whack. Maybe he'd fix it in a few minutes. Why was I cast out if I wasn't a werewolf? You are something of a special case, Naru-chan, his mother explained. You're a werewolf and a Hanyo. Normally your demon half would protect you from the curse, but since you inherited it from your father before you were ever born. So it really is his fault, the boy muttered bitterly. If my father hadn't been a werewolf I wouldn't be such a freak gawk. She'd smacked the back of his head. Mom. Don't you go bad-mouthing someone you know nothing about. She scolded with a sharp look. I know enough, Naruto snapped. Kakashi-sensei and Ero-sennin acted like he was someone great, but he was dumb enough to get bitten by Aoi. Enough. His mother's blue-gray eyes were dark and Naruto shivered, suddenly feeling nervous as he rubbed the back of his head to ease the sting of the second smack. No matter how great the ninja, they all started out as green genin without a scrap of practical experience. Your father was bitten on his very first C-rank mission outside of the village when he was younger than you are now. Only sheer luck allowed him to survive while both of his teammates were torn to pieces right in front of him. He didn't stand a chance. Ice dripped down Naruto's spine upon hearing his mother's little story, but he stubbornly kept up his angry pout. Whatever. Brat, she sighed and grabbed the backpack she'd set next to the couch. I've brought a few things for you. Presents. Naruto immediately perked up. She pulled out a white bundle and shook it out to reveal a long coat. It was mostly white with short sleeves and a red flame pattern running along the bottom and a red string to tie it closed. Naruto thought it looked pretty cool. After draping the coat over the back of the couch, she pulled out a couple of kunai. They weren't the usual diamond-shaped throwing knives. Instead they had 3 points, almost like regular kunai combined with a sai, and the handles were a bit longer than normal. Weird, but kinda neat, Naruto decided as he accepted one from her hand and turned it over. It's a bit heavy. These are some of your father's things, she told him. His awe of the coat and unusual blades immediately turned to wariness. I'd like for you to hold on to these for me, she continued, setting the other kunai down on the couch arm. I have a few pictures, too, but I should probably get going. You're leaving. Naruto squeaked. So we'll look at them next time, she finished and ruffled his hair. Yes, I'm here on business, remember? But I'll come back maybe tomorrow. So calm down. But you just got here. He whined. I've been here more than 2 hours already, she smiled sadly. And I'll be back soon. I'll definitely be around for the full moon, too. That was good. He remembered how his mother would become a beast, too, and keep him company all night long during the full moon. It had made those nights mostly fun, even if she hadn't been able to understand him while he'd been furry. Okay, Naruto mumbled. Be good, get better, and I'll be back, his mother commanded. She gave him one last fierce hug and then bustled off as quickly as she'd come. The only signs that she'd been there were the coat and kunai she'd left behind for him to hang on to for her. Naruto set down the weird kunai he'd been holding next to its partner and curled up on his side on the couch and swallowed hard. I'm not going to cry, he chanted. She'll come back. I'm not going to cry. I've cried enough. I'm too old to cry like a baby. He sniffled and rubbed at his eyes. I'm not going to cry. Kushina bit the inside of her cheek to hold her composure. She hated leaving him when he looked so fragile and afraid, but as she'd told him she had work to do here. If she hadn't torn herself away, she would have stayed with him until he was well enough to come with her and ignored everything else. So, where is this Mangetsu guy? She demanded as she stood in the backyard. He's still out, Yamato shrugged as he stood just outside of the back door of the dilapidated house. He should be back soon. Damn it. She snarled quietly. I wanted to discuss the full moon with him. You could wait. Yamato hesitantly suggested. No, if I don't leave now I won't leave, she sighed, clutching the straps of her bag tight in frustration. You tell him when he comes back that I want to talk to him. Sure thing, the feline-masked Umbu agreed. Thanks, Kushina muttered. Sucking in a deep breath, she ran up the trunk of one of the overgrown backyard trees and used it to hop onto a nearby telephone pole so she could run along the non-electrified wires, strung from the poles specifically for shinobi use, back towards the bustling heart of Konoha. She'd had to get out of that house. It wasn't just because she knew that she wouldn't be able to leave her son if she didn't go at that moment. But also because her sinuses had started to really clear up after all her crying, and every inhalation had her thinking that she smelled traces of Minato in the air, which was quite impossible. What a fantastic time to start losing my grip on reality. That's it for part 11. Thank you for watching and see you on the next video.